Virgin
Beauty
Bitch Podcast. Inspiring women to overcome social stereotypes and share unique life experiences without fear of being defiantly different. Your hosts, Christopher and Heather. Let's talk, shall we?
Now, before we introduce our guest, I would like to ask a question first. Do you know anyone who suffers under addictions? That could be nicotine, could be alcohol, could be drugs. If you do, then I assume you also know that few conditions are more debilitating or devastating to an individual or their family and friends, right? But do you know there is one particularly destructive addiction which is on a pandemic scale but is routinely overlooked or ignored? What is that? Well, here's a hint. Our guest is Dr. Vera Tarman. She is a world-renowned expert who writes, speaks, and treats people struggling with food addictions. Vera, welcome to Virgin Beauty Bitch.
Oh, thank you, Christopher. That was a great intro. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. Now, Vera, to gain some context for those listening, how did food addiction become your personal mission?
Well, I can give you the personal and the professional story. So the personal story, just briefly, I like so many young women in my 20s, struggled with my weight. I mean, it's endemic, it's pandemic, it's whatever. Show me a woman, just to use your language, that hasn't struggled with their weight, even if their weight was normal. And so in my early 20s, in my university years, I did the whole thing of, not eating and overworking or working out. And somewhere in there, I got into a pattern of behavior, which I didn't recognize then as addiction, although I saw it as I'm acting addictively, but I didn't see, oh, this is an addiction. I actually saw it as this must be an eating disorder of some sort, because my weight was really low and then I just went overboard. But even then, the whole concept of eating disorders was a relatively new field, mainly focused on women, but not only, of course. And so that was sort of my personal story, my entry into that world. And then as I, over the years, tried to manage that, never successfully, like never, each year, because addiction is chronic and progressive, each year it just seemed to get worse. And my focus on trying to maintain my weight and then even managing my weight just got more and more difficult to do. And it wasn't until my professional world, where I was working as an addiction doctor, that I started to connect the dots, because nobody was talking about it academically, by no means at that point. But I just saw that my behavior around food and even weight management was so obsessed and so in the way of life. It really was a dominant force in my life, that I thought, this is the same as my patients. And then as I started to pay attention professionally, I then started to see the emerging research, which really started in the late 90s. It's fairly new research, and then started to speak professionally. And then I guess it was because professionally there was still no recognition, and I would speak basically on deaf ears professionally. But when I spoke to patients, they would be going, yeah, that's right. Like I could see that there was a big void and a need to hear the message sort of communally in the community, but in the professional world, there was a real stonewalling. And that just got my back up, because I thought that made all the difference for me. I mean, my weight, I lost 100 pounds and I've maintained that weight loss since then. And I don't obsess about food anymore. I guess you could say I still do, but in this context, professionally speaking about it, but not in the sense of, filled with shame and self-loathing and what am I going to eat today and what do I have to burn off to be able to eat all that stuff. That's what a lot of people live with. And anyway, because I don't live with that for many years now, I'm very, very persistent to keep speaking. It's become my mission. And on my mission, especially now with the internet world opening up, I'm discovering more and more people who have the same mission, and they were sort of in pockets here and there doing their thing like me, and now we're starting to recognize each other. So my book and then my podcast, Food Junkies, has been a way to oh my God, there's a lot of people speaking this, and I think we're on a tipping point. to talk about this concept of food addiction, which is still stonewalled by the professional community. But hopefully in 2 years, I'll have a different take on it. Hopefully we'll have made some move.
I mean, I just, in hearing you say that, I agree with you that I don't know a single woman who hasn't had some sort of a battle with how her body image relates to the predominant beauty standard of the day, and what we do to get closer to what we already know is an unrealistic standard and airbrushed and all of those other things. Yeah. And even though we know that it's airbrushed and isn't realistic, we still strive for it. So we're, setting ourselves up for an unattainable, realistic, unattainable goal. And I think, on a personal note, I know exactly what you're thinking of. How, if I don't work out today, how little do I need to eat to still have that deficit of calories? And just that mentality and how damaging it is, or, even when it comes to weighing ourselves when you want to get to a certain, BMI or whatever that is, it can very easily become obsessive. Would you mind diving into it a little bit more, into when you talk about addiction and food addiction? Because when I think of food addiction, the first thing that comes to mind to me is, comfort eating and eating because it's soothing, either anxiety or a worry, or again, back to self-loathing or shame. So could you, do you go into both sides of that in your work, or all sides? And can you go into that a little further for us?
Yeah, it's a good entry point into the whole area. So, one of the things that we as women do is we take all this on ourselves. This is us. We need to lose weight, or we need to, achieve this standard that you're talking about. And we just simply can't do it. And it's for some reason our fault. And the first thing that needs to be done is to focus the attention to where it belongs, which is primarily the food industry of today, the processed food industry of today. Like if we were eating the foods that we ate 100 years ago, we wouldn't be comfort eating in the way that we do now, because the food is simply not that comfortable after the first plateful. You can love Brussels sprouts and, you're feeling down and you eat them, but after a plateful, they're not giving you that pleasurable feeling. You're going to push the plate aside. But the food of today has a drug-like effect. It gives literally comfort. And I'm not saying a person who succumbs to that comfort is a food addict by any means. They're just responding to the food industry's manipulation of our taste buds, and of the ingredients that do that, making food a drug, like maybe a glass of wine or 2 glasses of wine. And a lot of people will eat, instead of a glass of wine, they'll have the dessert. And, but there's a number of people who become essentially, they're susceptible, and they take that glass of wine and then they need 2 and 3, and then they become the alcoholic or the food addict. But not everybody is. So I want to first of all say, all of us women, men, all of us people are already under, we need to look at the food industry and what that's doing to us. That's number one. Take the blame away from us, but to the manipulators, essentially. And, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, please appreciate that. But I will, food addiction is a political issue, an economic issue, as well as a personal issue. It just simply is. And if I can just make that really clear, if you look behind the scenes of who owns the food and like the sugar industry, basically, it's the same people who own the diet industry. It's the same people, the same companies who own weight loss companies. And they win no matter where you are, whether you're gaining the weight from comfort food, trying to get it off, or somewhere in between with diet foods. It doesn't matter, they're winning. So anyway, I don't want to get on to talk only about politics. There is an issue. There is an issue there. So recognizing that we are all succumbed if we're eating processed food. If we're not, then I think that's the simplest solution to food addiction, is just don't eat processed food, or basically sugar, or sugar and fat combos. But then where it becomes an addiction is when, like I said, not everybody in the population becomes a food addict, just like not everyone becomes a cocaine addict or an alcoholic. But there's a susceptible group of people, and they're the ones that can get caught. And unfortunately, they're also the ones that are on, the world's greatest weight loss. Or what's that show? The greatest weight loss, the 600-pound weight loss.
A 600-pound self. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Those are probably food addicts. But what do we see? We see this obese person that we can laugh at and loathe and basically blame them without recognizing this is just a poor person who's somehow probably has tried to stop multiple times, in the same way as the cocaine addict doesn't want to be on the street losing their home. This is something has taken over, and basically that's the addiction itself.
But do we take now that extreme and we say, okay, those people are addicts, but if I'm sitting here on the couch munching away 5 bags of potato chips, I'm not 600 pounds, so that's not me?
What I would say to that is you're already eating addictively, and you can. This is an analogy we use often in the addiction world. You can still get off the bus, but if you stay on the bus and keep eating that what essentially happens is the brain, just like if you have a couple of cigarettes here and there, you're not a smoker. But if you keep smoking a pack a day, eventually the body changes and adapts. We have tolerance, dependency, that whole thing that happens with addiction happens with sugar too. So you may at this point be able to put away after 3 bags of chips, stop, and I've really had enough, I'm going to stop. And I would encourage anybody do that. But if you stay on the bus, you will eventually, I believe, become some version of a food addict. Yeah. I
just want to give a number that you get here in a sec, Heather. I just want to give a number. The weight loss market in the U.S. is a $72 billion market, by the way. Right.
That's a lot. And if we want to look at percentage of so, it's like we say with the alcohol industry. The alcohol industry is fed by what are called the heavy users, food industry, the heavy eaters. It's like 20% of the alcohol industry. 80% is fed by 20% of users. And similarly with food, it's probably, I don't have specific numbers, but it's probably that 80% of the food industry is supported by 20% of the heavy eaters. And we know that food addiction is probably about 15% of the population. And then if we look at the obese population, probably about 40 to 50, maybe 60% of them are food addicts. They're keeping the system happily going. Not intentionally, it's because they've been roped in. Yeah, it's big industry, and food anyway, I don't want to get too much into politics, because then I'll just go on and on. It is very political. In the 1970s, we had a term called the personal is political, and it is here too. The personal is political.
I think that's actually extremely important, because when it comes to the corporatization of food that I think you're talking about, part of the ploy is to make sure that we don't see that, there's more in common with each other than apart. And I think when you speak towards, I think when you hear that, so many women struggle with how we perceive ourselves with our own weight, I think that when we paint others as in, because I think that what we're instructed is that if you're similar to, like, if you pull up your bootstraps, like if you're disciplined and if you blah, 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 if you check all of these boxes and you're a well-rounded human, then you won't go down this path. And if you do, that it's on the individuals. And so they're even painting us against each other, which is just so unfair. And I think that what you're speaking towards here is that same thing that has led a person further down the line. In a certain way, many of us are all along that same spectrum of, if enough, negative things came up in our lives, that if that food was providing us with, at the immediate sugar rush, that comfort feeling, similar to that glass of wine where you feel a sense of relief from your anxiety because all of your body is reacting in a way to say, hey, this is pleasing for the moment. And for the moment, I can forget about all of these other things that I'm worried about. How easy is it for any of us to kind of fall into that, that disastrous mind frame that is so painted, by corporatization.
Absolutely. And, and it doesn't even have to be to the extreme that I was painting it. It can be like in the middle where you are still just doing the 2 or 3 bags of chips, not the 6 or the 10. And, that's all you're doing. Because even there, you say, okay, I've had the the row of cookies on the box. I've had one row. That's all I'm going to have. I know it's too much, but that's all I'm going to have. But it's a bit like saying, I'm just going to have 4 or 5 cigarettes today. Just the fact that you keep reintroducing that basically addictive drug of nicotine, it makes it hard to just stop at the row or to cut back. So you might say, okay, that's all I have is the row. But some days I don't want to have the row at all, but you still want the row because we just have to recognize this stuff is addictive and it's made to be addictive. Sugar, and when I'm talking about sugar, I'm talking about added refined sugar. I'm not talking about the sugar in a corn cob or a beet, which of course there's a lot of sugar, but I'm not talking about that, or fruit, or any kind of vegetables. That kind of sugar, fine. It's the refined stuff. When you take it out of its substance, it becomes too much for what the brain can manage. And then the brain has to change itself to moderate, and it can't moderate. And so things start to basically fall apart, which is essentially the beginning of addiction.
It's become so natural, normal, of parents with children and how
Gosh, don't get me on that one. Go ahead, please ask your question. I'm sorry.
No, I mean, you know where I'm going with this. As a child, you're doomed. Your whole life is now not a carrot on a stick, but a candy on a stick. That's your life.
Yeah, that's right. And when that started, that whole idea about candy is a nice little treat. That was in the days when it was maybe once a week or on your birthday or on Christmas, or it wasn't like every day instead of meals. Like basically, what do we give kids for breakfast? It's dessert called cereal. That wasn't the case in my day. So that idea of candy as an act of love, or chocolate as an act of love, might have worked 30 years ago, but now it doesn't work anymore. It's just too much. There's just too much abundance of this addictive substance.
Not only that, but the pressure of parenting alone is difficult enough. And if you can get a relief by giving a treat, sometimes that becomes, the go-to.
You know what? So I'm coming from the addiction world. We saw the same thing happen 200 years ago when women would give a little opiate tincture to their baby. And now we think about that and go, oh my God, how could you have done that? Well, we're doing that. We're doing that, but it's called sugar today. Like, really, we did. It was called Winslow's Soothing Syrup. Really? We gave it to a baby when they were teething, and mom would have a little bit herself.
I think the mom part still happens. But you're helping me recall some of my childhood there, because I think that when you say that it's used for parents to have a bit of a leverage to say, if you can be good today, if you'll listen to, mom or dad or parent today, that, you can have this treat at the end of the day. And really, when you think about the psychology that forms around that as a child, with that kind of rewards-based system for kind of just being a good human, or the bare minimum, it's something to pay attention to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I'm curious, from your position, this disconnect now from what you have championed now for so long, and the industry, just being a doctor or whatever it might be, this disconnect. How do you connect these dots? How do we get the bigger scale of healthcare to understand your perspective?
Yes, so, in my field, when I'm working with people, especially professionally, so medically, most of the time people are coming because they're coming from the world of obesity or diabetes, medical conditions that are often related to obesity. And they are coming from a sort of clinical world where there's medication and surgery and diet therapy, but not that much anymore, because they have recognized clinicians. And in fact, there's almost not exactly aversion, but hesitation to recommend that people go on a diet. And there's a real push sort of for, we don't want to be fat phobic. We don't want to make people feel bad about themselves. So there's a reluctance to push the diet, and it's much more focused on medication and a surgery. In fact, bariatric surgery, which is, affecting the intestinal tract, and there's 4 different ways to do it, is considered the #1 way of treating obesity and metabolic syndrome. I find that personally appalling, but because meds only help to some degree, and diet doesn't work ultimately. People always lose the weight and then gain it back. But what they're missing is the piece that the reason why people gain the weight back, the reason why they continue to struggle with food, is because there's an addictive substance in the food that makes them so that they can't stop eating the top row of cookies, and they can't let the cookie go because something is calling them. And it's not Brussels sprouts. Like I said, if it was Brussels sprouts, there'd be no problem here. And when we say this is an addiction, the medical community will say, we believe in the concept of moderation. We want people to be able to eat anything and everything. Don't be afraid of food. Don't be afraid of your weight. Learn to have just a couple of cookies, and that's the end of it. That would be like saying just have a couple of cigarettes, instead of quitting completely. And if we say, no, it's addictive, they'll say, why would you bring the concept of addiction? It's so stigmatic into an already stigmatic area, ill health, diabetes, and obesity. Why would you add that? And our response to that is, well, let's destigmatize the concept of addiction. It's actually pretty prevalent in society. Who amongst us doesn't overeat or overshop or over internet or over something? It's already endemic. Let's just call it what it is and not make such a big fuss about how awful it is. We all have different shades of it to some degree, unless we're living, like I said, 200 years ago without an iPhone and without, processing. Let's just get over it. And then we can use the tools that are actually very effective so that a person can get off their diabetic medication. Their weight, because we don't focus on weight. This is not about, women getting that cosmetic perfection, whatever it is. It's about whatever weight you should be eating as much as you need of unprocessed food, which is usually a body mass index that's normal or even a little bit above normal. Fine. This is not about fat shaming. Whenever somebody comes to me and says, I want to lose weight, I will always say, that's not the focus here. The focus is stop eating the addictive foods and the rest will just take care of it. So your body will be what it should be. And, you're going to be so happy that you're not calculating in your head your pounds or your calories. You're going to probably be happy with wherever you end up. At least that's my experience.
So how do we get off the bus?
Yeah, well, okay. So getting off the bus is, first of all, recognizing that there is probably something addictive in the foods that you're eating. And it's usually whatever do you have a super attachment to, I cannot, the person who drinks too much, it's like, how will I not have that bottle of wine or half a bottle of wine at night before I go to sleep? It's impossible. How will I not have that dessert, that tub of ice cream? I'm not talking about a little bit. It's usually a tub, or it's usually something. So whatever it is that you are struggling with, at whatever degree you're at, because like I said, you can get off the bus sooner than later. And if something is calling to you in a way that you shouldn't and you want to stop, recognizing, okay, that's a trigger food in some way. Something has happened. We could talk about medical language. It's the dopamine response in the brain that's, you're getting this spike of pleasure that you don't get with Brussels sprouts, even though I love Brussels sprouts. I love them. I really do. And look forward to them when I have them. But I don't have that same reaction as I would if it were a tub of ice cream, which was a favorite of mine many years ago. Or, those ice cream bars that were just delicious with all sorts of stuff on them. I don't have that kind of reaction. And so there was something about that substance. And then recognizing the shift. It has to be a mind shift. And I would really like to see this before I die, that we start to see the shift the way that we did with cigarettes. In my early days, I literally, when I was in medical school, sat beside a oncologist smoking cigarettes in the room with me. Like they were still smoking on planes. Now the person has to go outside, freeze out there and smoke. I'd love to see the same thing with the desserts. The person has to go outside and have a dessert. If we can change the mentality that this trigger food is a trigger for a reason, and let's call it what it is, a drug, and stop it.
But I guess the challenge there is that if I smoke, obviously I'm affecting the environment around me. If I'm eating a tub of ice cream, I'm only impacting me.
Yes and no. I mean, there is, I guess when you're smoking, there's the potential of a secondhand smoke. But when you're eating, I mean, one thing you're first of all probably doing is normalizing that this is a toxin, that it's actually normal. It's okay. It's just dessert, or it's love, or it's comfort. So then it makes it harder for the person who wants to say no. Just anybody think about it. If you've lost weight, and people are going, wow, Vera, you look great. You've lost so much weight. Have some, whatever it is that I made. And you say, no, I don't want to have that. It's not like, okay, like you quit smoking. I'm not going to offer you a cigarette. It's like, it's almost like an open game to try to get that person to have a little bit of gain. So there is a kind of subtlety of acceptance that does affect the population. Your children who are watching you are recognizing this is okay to do because Dad, Christopher, if it's okay with him, it's got to be okay with me. Like there is a subtle messaging that's going on. So I wouldn't say that it's quite a benign, I'm not affecting people. And there's triggers, I see that. That makes me think about, especially if you have a history of using that. Oh yeah, that was really good. Yeah, okay, I'll have that. And didn't think about it before.
Yeah. Oh.
Actually, the social cues are probably the hardest thing for a person who's had an issue. This is usually later stage. The person who finally got off the damn sugar and is now trying to stay off. The hardest thing about staying off is not them wanting it anymore, because one of the messages I hope I can leave with you today is it actually only takes a few weeks to get over this desire for sugar, this feeling of deprivation. But what persists is the social expectation that you should just be able to pick up and eat normally again. What, are you still on that crazy diet? And all of the social cues, that's the stuff that makes it really hard to stop. But the actual doing it's 3 weeks of difficulty. I don't want to say hell because it's not hell for everybody, but it is for some. And then it's over. It is over. You're going to look back and go, I can't believe I ate that stuff. It's so sickly sweet now.
Where can a person go to get the resources to do this?
Well, okay. So in this world of food addiction, which is still relatively small, when I tried to get my book published, I guess it was 8 or 9 years ago. With big publishers, I was told it's a niche product. Nobody's going to want this. And I thought, how can that be? All of us women are struggling with this issue. How can it be? But it was the perspective itself that I guess was considered niche. I did finally get a Canadian publisher, but I just couldn't believe that concept. Now, I think that 8 years later, with, like I said, the concept that more and more people are willing to talk about the addictive nature of foods, of sugar, so that there's more, it's not such a weird thought. So now, because of that, there are now more people in the field. I'm not just one of a handful. Maybe now I'm one of 1 or 2,000. It literally used to be 1 in 100. Like it's growing, and every year I see growing more and more and more. So if anybody's listening and wants to know where do I go next, I mean, I have a Facebook page that I can recommend. Can I do that here?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so I have a Facebook page called I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life. And you can sign up there. And I have a lot of people who are working in the field who have a post where they offer their services. There's my podcast, that Food Junkies podcast, where we're always interviewing people in the field and talking about the various aspects of sugar addiction, either industrial or mental or clinical or whatever. And then there's, of course, my book, Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction.
We love to ask our guest, Vera, if there was one of the kind of archetypes or, words that we have in our heading that spoke to you, virgin, beauty, bitch, if one hit you and what it brought up for you.
Oh my gosh. I don't think virgin would fit any of this. And I don't know, beauty is, I'm not so keen on that word because of the connotations, the expectation for women. I don't like bitch, but I guess I'm going to have to go with that one.
Well, just so you know.
It sounds like a bitch to say quit sugar, but I do want to say that it actually is not a bitch. It's after a few weeks, it's actually a relief. So, yeah, the bitch, but behind the bitch is relief.
Beautiful. Well said.
freedom.
Very well
freedom.
said. Very well
Okay.
said. And by the way, we use those words not in the context that normal, language has put them in. We try to
Okay.
spin them to represent whatever a person feels about,
Okay, well,
about them.
can you let me have another go at it then?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so virgin, for some people, the thought of quitting sugar would be like virgin territory. Like, how can I do that? And I just want to say that actually, there's a lot of people now who are sharing your own fear and have tools that actually you can get help. It's actually not as bad. It's actually more wonderful than it appears. And beauty, you will get in touch with the beautiful part of you, because addiction brings out the ugly. It brings out the selfish. It brings out the I need this before I can be beautiful. And it says, no, you don't need that. You can actually be your beautiful self. So yeah, but you have to get through the bitch first. There you go.
Vera,
I
you
love
could have been
the
our
answer.
spokesperson. You could be our spokesperson.
Okay, great.
I'm so glad we had a round 2 of those. That was amazing.
Fantastic. We are very, very touched and honored. And so is anyone who's farming Brussels sprouts right now.
They're my favorite. And cauliflower.
So we are so happy to have had this time to share and learn so much from you. We deeply appreciate that, Vera.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking me on.
Our pleasure.
Thank you for sharing your work with us. And I hope people tune into your podcast and check out your book to hear from other people in this sphere, to hopefully find some relief and some new ways of looking at things, if that's what you're looking for as one of our listeners.
Well, thanks again, Vera. And you've been listening to
The Virgin
The Beauty.
and the Bitch.
Find us, like us, share us. Come on back. We have way more fantastic conversations for you to enjoy. Thank you.